Welcome to another edition of Horse Center, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I am joined by my illustrious partner, Matt, Breeders' Cup Shipment. How are you today, Matt?
I'm great, Brian, and it's amazing, but we're just a little more than 2 weeks away from the Breeders' Cup.
A little bit more than 2 weeks away from the World Championships, Matt. Very exciting right here at Keeneland. We're sponsored by Keeneland Select. And Matt, we're going to have a fun show today because we are talking about the most memorable, our personal most memorable Breeders' Cup races from history. Let's jump right in, Matt.
Yep, let's do it.
It very well may be my favorite race. Sorry to say it, Easygoer fans, but my favorite race of all time. I've been watching horse racing for over 40 years, Matt, and I don't know if any one race gave me more pleasure than the 1989 Classic featuring the matchup between Sunday Silence and Easygoer. I was a Sunday Silence fan, and Sunday Silence won that huge race at Gulfstream Park, which decided the championships.
Yeah, and they'd had quite a rivalry going on that entire year, dating back to the Trail to the Triple Crown, and then in the Triple Crown races with Easygoer winning the Belmont Stakes, and there was the whole West Coast, East Coast thing going on between the fans and the riders. It was quite a rivalry.
Quite a rivalry. Sunday Silence beat Easygoer. They ran 1-2 in the Derby. Sunday Silence beat Easygoer in one of the best Preaknesses ever. What a stretch battle that was. Easygoer defended his home turf in dominating style in the Belmont. Again, they ran 1-2. Easygoer was amazing leading up to the Breeders' Cup, winning all those Grade 1 races in New York. Sunday Silence had an issue in the stretch where he lost a big lead in the swaps to Prized, came back to the Super Derby with a huge win. The stage was set. It was for the championship, the Horse of the Year. Bunch of good older horses in there, Matt, but it came down to Sunday Silence, more maneuverable. Couple times Easygoer got within shouting distance, and Sunday Silence opened up on him. But then, in the last 100 yards, Easygoer just leveled off. His leads were switched, and he came like a freight train, but it was too late.
Yeah, again, like you said, Brian, it was an amazing end to a pretty fantastic rivalry of two horses that became Hall of Famers.
Two great horses, two great three-year-olds. What a Breeders' Cup Classic it was. The year before, Matt, we had some fireworks as well.
Yeah, in the 1988 Distiff. I'll tell you, Brian, if I was pushed to pick out the most memorable Breeders' Cup performance, I might go with this race. Personal Ensign came in riding that amazing win. She was looking to end her career perfect with her 13th win, and the track came up super sloppy at Churchill Downs. She was butting heads with the Kentucky Derby winning filly, winning colors. This was no easy task. And I'll tell you, Brian, I've watched this replay so many times, but every time I watch it, I still don't think that Personal Ensign is going to get there. She was so far behind, but just such courage and determination. And right at the end, the Phipps filly did it.
I just remember my father and I were at the Meadowlands. We were watching races, and we were watching the Breeders' Cup races on the TVs there at the Meadowlands. And I remember my father yelling, "The Derby winner is loose on the lead." I think he yelled it about 4 times during the race. Winning Colors didn't do a ton after she won the Derby and ran a good race in the Preakness. Finished up the track in the Belmont. In the Masquette, Personal Ensign had beaten her a little bit more convincingly, although Winning Colors had run well. So when they got to the Distaff, everybody was on Personal Ensign, still undefeated, the older mare. But yeah, it sure looked like Winning Colors had her the entire stretch run. I remember Goodbye Halo in the middle of the two running a big race. But how Personal Ensign dug down deep and caught her was stuff of legend and stuff of a very rare undefeated champion.
Yeah, it was impressive. And I actually was watching those races from Parks. So it was, even not being there, it was just so exciting and amazing way for Personal Ensign to end a perfect career.
Even those around the TV were going crazy, Matt. I agree. 3 years later at the same venue, Churchill Downs, We had the most impressive Breeders' Cup Juvenile in history. Arazzi runs right by him, Matt. Bertrando was that nice Calbred who kind of was a speed horse and looked pretty good heading into the far turn. But Arazzi had come from way back with a sudden burst of speed on the turn, and it looked like the challenge was set between the favorite American, Bertrando, against this hotshot from France. He'd won a bunch of races in a row. This was probably the most hyped 2-year-old that's ever come over from Europe, and he ran right by him, Matt.
Oh, it was just talk about an explosive move and leaving a really, really good horse looking like he was going backwards in Bertrando. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And of course, Arazzi was coming from the American really connections of Alan Poulsen, but he sent this horse to France, but felt like an American because it was Alan Poulsen and just terrific. And we all know Alan Poulsen, interesting names of his horses. He named all of his horses for aviation checkpoints because, of course, he made his money in that kind of business. But wow, Arazzi was terrific and would head off to the Derby as a tremendously hyped favorite.
Yeah, Francois Boutin was his trainer in France, and of course, yeah, he didn't follow up the 3-year-old year with all the promise he showed it to. I don't know that there's been a more promising 2-year-old that I've ever seen. Secretariat, maybe a few would rival Arazzi, but what he did in France and then what he did in his first distance race, his first race on dirt, he could have won that Breeders' Cup Juvenile by 15, I think, if he wasn't geared down in the stretch. What a performance. Matt, we've been talking about dirt. I think we got to bring some turf races into the picture here.
We absolutely do. And the 1986 turf, which was won by the great Manila, is a good one to bring up.
Yeah, a good one to bring up, and I think I just mentioned how hyped Arazzi was coming to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile in '91, but back in '86, Dancing Brave was probably the most hyped horse to come from Europe in the history of the Breeders' Cup. He was considered invincible. He had dominated with his unbelievable turn of foot. He just blew horses away in the stretch in all the big races in Europe that year as a 3-year-old. And here he was, son of Lafard, going against an American son of a Lafard who really did a lot as a 3-year-old, really developed Manila, and most people didn't give the American a chance.
And it was a pretty darn good field there. Aside from Dancing Brave, you had the really talented Theatrical. You had Escott in there. And it turned out that the race was really between those 3 horses, with Estropod getting out and setting the early fractions on the lead, and Theatrical not far behind. Manila making a move with Jose Santos up, trying to come up the rail. And there was some good gamesmanship, some real old-fashioned race riding there, where Fernando Torres he wouldn't give Manila and Jose Santos a path up the rail. So coming down the stretch, Santos had to make a decision, and he suddenly swerved Manila out a few paths into the middle of the track, lost ground, but amazingly was able to get the win and pass Theatrical, who at that point had gone by Estropod.
Great turf race, Matt. Manila, I think he did it for America. He won one for America before Tiznow. That could be a coming attraction to more folks. Manila and Dancing Brave, the unbeatable, was vanquished, was beaten, kind of didn't have quite the kick that he usually did. But Manila was one of the greatest American turf horses that I've ever seen. Matt, I want to remind our viewers that we're brought to you by Keeneland Select today. Let's jump right back into our favorites. And I think we need to talk about that race out in California that brought together 2 Derby winners. And not only did it bring together 2 Derby winners, Matt, but the 2 Derby winners were coming to the wire together.
They sure did. And I'll tell you, the final surge of Ali Sheba coming to the wire, I watched that replay, and I really still find it hard to believe that Ali Sheba didn't get up in that last step.
Ferdinand was a really good older horse. He never won a string of races together, but he ran a ton of good races. Obviously, he was a Derby winner the year before. He was probably the best mile and a quarter older horse in the country, and by that time, he sure was. And he ran his race, and still the 3-year-old Ali Sheba almost got him. The two Derby winners hit the wire together, Matt. I'll never forget that race call. Awesome Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, the classic produced so many great moments.
Another one I'll never forget, and I guess this race call happened after the finish, was Dahss. Dahss had won the Breeders' Cup Mile in 1996. I kind of expected him to win the 1996 Breeders' Cup Mile, but 2 years later, 2 years off, basically, he had one little allowance race after almost 2 years off at Laurel against no one, and then he comes to the Breeders' Cup Mile against the best milers in the country, and he runs huge for trainer Michael Dickinson.
Yeah, and you know, you got to say that only a trainer like Michael Dickinson would even think about trying to bring a horse back after 2 years, and then to be able to succeed. You know, Michael Dickinson has a reputation of, of being a little bit different than everybody else, and he thought outside of the box and brought the Dahss back. And hats off to an amazing, amazing performance by Dahss and an amazing job by Michael Dickinson.
Yeah, you have to give Dickinson a lot of credit for the training job. I love to give the horse a lot of credit. Dahss was just as consistent as they come. He could run fast on dirt, but his best was a mile on turf, and he won 2 of those Breeders' Cup miles. In this race that we're watching, of course, Hawksley Hill looked like he had him dead to rights, and Dahss just showed a ton of heart. Matt, it was the best comeback since Lazarus.
Well said, Brian.
Not my line.
We're going to stay on the turf again. We're going to stay talking about the great mile event. And I'll tell you, it isn't that the 2010 mile was an exceptionally amazing performance. It was just another amazing performance by the amazing filly Goldikova. Only horse to win 3 Breeders' Cup races. And she did 3 in a row with that amazing turn of foot coming down the stretch. She did it like that every single time. And, I know Beholder's going for her 3rd Breeders' Cup win in 3 different races, but it's still not the same as what Goldikova did. Coming over from France each of those years for the Wertheimer and Frere, Freddie Head as the famous trainer who himself as a jockey did some nice things in the Breeders' Cup. Breeders' Cup legend, Goldikova.
Breeders' Cup legend for sure, Matt. Other horses might have won 3. We just mentioned Dahss. Who knows if he was healthy, if he could have won 3. Miesk was as powerful a miler as I've ever seen. Beholder could do it in a couple of weeks in 3 different races. But the honest truth is, no one else did it. Goldikova did it. She won 3 Breeders' Cup races, and she is a legend, as is another horse who paired together Breeders' Cup wins. I'm talking about the 01 Classic, the Breeders' Cup Classic. Tiznow kind of came from nowhere as a 3-year-old, became the best horse in the country by the end of the year, and beat off Giants Causeway in a great Breeders' Cup Classic in 00. In 4, he had some health. The next year, as a 4-year-old, he had some health problems. Looked dead to rights. Saki had him in the Breeders' Cup Classic at Belmont Park soon after 9/11. We needed a hero, Matt, and we got it. We got it in the shape of Tiznow.
Yeah, we sure did. It was, and keeping in mind that the Breeders' Cup was in New York at Belmont Park that year, and the event was coming up less than two months after the tragedy at the World Trade Center, and there was Tiznow in the pink silks, and he just ran a wonderful race, sitting there in like 3rd place or so, stalking the pace, and he let go that run, and Tom Durkin was as much up for the occasion as Tiznow was. he was ready with one of his great legendary race calls. And when Tiznow repeated and hit the wire, he proclaimed it was Tiznow winning it for America. It was, you know, a terrific finish at a tough time for the nation.
Yeah, resilient, gutsy, much like our American mottos that you know we need to overcome. And Tiznow did it in '01, a classic that'll never be forgotten, Matt. Another classic, maybe of all the Breeders' Cup races that I've ever seen in person, the energy for the 2010 Classic was through the roof. The place, Churchill Downs, was electric. It was a evening race. Zenyatta was 19 for 19. She was America's hero in 2010. But that 4-year-old colt that she had to run against was awfully, awfully good. Blame doesn't get the respect he deserves. And after a slow, sluggish start for Zenyatta, she was rolling down the stretch like a freight train, Matt, but Blame had something left for her, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely did. And I agree. Blame does not get the credit that he deserved. You know, there was so much hype and so much endless talk heading into the race about Zenyatta, as well there should have been, and the perfect career. But I don't know. Blame was so determined and so gritty, and he was so good in 2010. I always kind of felt like, and people didn't say it, but I always felt like Zenyatta got farther behind in that race than ever before. To me, she seemed to be distracted by the lights and running at night in a new place. And I still feel like if she'd had more time to acclimate out there, that maybe she wouldn't have gotten so far behind and the result may have been different. But like you said, Brian, Blame was super tough, and I don't know if he was going to let her by under any circumstance.
Yeah, Matt, I think we have to say that now. I mean, Zenyatta was truly a marvelous horse, one of the best horses in American racing history, female or male. But Blame, at Churchill Downs especially, was a great horse. He was an excellent, excellent older male. And it looked like a rush by in the last few yards. But to be honest, Blame had something in reserve. Blame was fighting her off even as fast as she was coming. And I have to agree, I'm not sure if Zenyatta would have ever gotten by. Maybe she would have, maybe she wouldn't have. Breeders' Cup legend was made that night, 2010. I think Zenyatta earned a ton of respect for the race that she ran in her first losing race. Blame deserves that kind of respect as well. Great classic, great list. I guess we listed about 9 Breeders' Cup for our most memorable, Matt. That was fun.
It sure was. And that was just our list of most memorable. That didn't even include some of our favorite personal horses who won Breeders' Cup races.
That's right, Matt. I know you had to leave Cigar off. I apologize for that. But yeah, this was fun. Breeders' Cup, we could have mentioned another 10, 15, 20 easy. We probably see some of our most memorable this year at Keeneland. I want to thank Keeneland Select, our sponsor, Ember Marr, our wonderful producer, and thank you, Matt, for joining me once again on HorseCenter.
Yeah, my pleasure. And next week we'll start looking at the fields, I guess, Brian.
We'll jump right in. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next week.